In this episode, we will continue to learn how to display sprite sheet animations using Arcade. And the end result, what we are going to create, is this running cat. So let me show you first the sprite sheet itself. So it is in the assets folder, images, and this cat.png. And as you can see, this cat has 2 columns and 4 rows. And the first animation frame is this, then this is the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and this is the last animation frame. And each of these frames has a size of 512 and 256, so 512 width and 256 height in pixels. Let's go for a moment to the documentation, and here click on the API reference and click on the sprites. And here you will find the texture keyframe, what we are going to use, and also the texture animation. And there is one more, which is the animated walking sprite. Let me click on this one. But this is a deprecated functionality. So deprecated sprite for platformer games that supports walking animation. So we are not going to learn about this one. Okay, I have already prepared this basic template and already created a sprite list using arcade.spritelist, and I have already added the onDraw method and also the onUpdate method. So the next thing will be to load the sprite sheet itself. Using this command, I'm going to call it cutSheet and arcade.load sprite sheet and giving it the path to the assets, images, and cat.png. And also let's create again a texture list. So this is the same as we did in the last episode. So the texture list will be equal to cutSheet.getTextureGrid and giving it the size of the frames. So each frame is 512 by 256 width and height. It has 2 columns, so 2 columns, and count equals 8. So we have 8 frames. And now let's also create the frames, individual frames, using the texture keyframe class. For this, I'm just going to copy a few lines of code. So this will be the frame 1, using arcade.texture keyframe and giving it from the texture list the 0th index. And frame 2 will be also arcade texture keyframe and texture list at index 1. And doing this for the remaining 6 keyframes. So texture list at index 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So here we are just creating the so-called keyframes and creating a frames list and adding these keyframes to this frames list. So frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Of course, you should create a for loop and do it inside a for loop. I just showed you this way because this is a tutorial. So let me just comment this out and create a for loop for this. So I'm just going to create a frames list and also looping through the texture list. So for text in texture list, I'm just going to append to this frames list a new keyframe. So frames.append arcade.texture keyframe and giving it the texture. And this will do the same as we did here. Okay, now let's create an animation object using the arcade.texture animation and giving it the frames. And now let's create also an object from this class. So I'm just going to call it cell.player and using the arcade.texture animation sprite, and as its animation parameter we are going to set it to anim. We created here on line 31. Now let's set also its position. So cell.player position will be equal to 640 and 360. And now lastly just append this to the sprite list. So cell.spritelist.append the cell.player. Okay, let me draw this. So cell.spritelist.draw and let me run it. And of course now it shows only one frame, the first frame, which is this one. And to update the animation, That's why we need the onUpdate method, and here we should call the self.spritelist.update animation. So don't call the update because this won't work. Let me show you. Using the update, it still just shows the first frame. So that's why we should call the update_animation. And the update animation is a method from this texture animation sprite. So let me run it. And now, as you can see, our cat is animated. So in the previous episode and also in this episode, I showed you two ways how to load sprite sheet animations in Arcade. And as you can see, it is possible to load sprite sheet animations which are only one row, and also it is possible to load sprite sheet animations which have multiple rows, like this cat.